The Massacre of Mankind is the latest novel by acclaimed British sci-fi author Stephen Baxter, and is the second time Baxter has written his own continuation of a classic H.G. Wells novel. As the authorized sequel to Wells's The War of the Worlds, The Massacre of Mankind depicts a second Martian invasion of Earth in 1920, on a far grander and more catastrophic scale than the first in 1907, with journalist Julie Elphinstone caught in the middle as an intrepid chronicler and possible savior. In 1994, Baxter released his first Wells sequel, the outstanding The Time Ships, which is an officially recognized sequel to The Time Machine. The Time Ships is fantastic, with deeply evocative descriptions, intriguing and well-developed characters, an exciting diversity of settings, loopy paradoxes integrated smoothly into the narrative, and prose that emulates Wells's Victorian style without going overboard. The Massacre of Mankind, on the other hand, is a fairly engaging novel with some powerful sections, but is let down by relatively bland characters, jerky pacing, and an inconsistent narrative voice. The prelude to the invasion is rather dry, with heavy, blatant exposition about the oncoming forces. Julie is introduced as a plucky and resourceful protagonist, but most of the supporting characters are simple and static. Some even feel interchangeable in the early chapters, and again, we learn about them more through exposition than organic action. The novel has some great characters, including Julie, sensitive medic and veteran Frank Jenkins, assertive VAD Verity Bliss, coldly pragmatic collaborator Albert Cook, the artilleryman from the original novel, and the trio of Harry, Marigold, and Captain Bill Woodward in besieged New York, but aside from Julie, they undergo very little change. The novel revs into gear naturally when the Martians arrive, with detailed, harrowing accounts of their ruthless, seemingly unstoppable onslaught, and the numbed grief and desperation of their victims. I also quite like the novel's creative world-building. The unnamed narrator of The War of the Worlds, who I, like many other people, just assumed to be an author-insert Wells, is retroactively characterized as Walter Jenkins, a writer who effectively wrote The War of the Worlds, in this context a factual record known as the narrative within the novel's universe. H.G. Wells is thus, in a way, a character in The Massacre of Mankind after all. It's a neat idea, even if Walter is one of the weaker characters. The United Kingdom has become an authoritarian military state in the wake of the first invasion, with a strict prohibition on unsanctioned astronomy to prevent a panic. European history has, to an extent, been accelerated by the first invasion, and not just technologically, in the form of Martian aluminum and forays into atomic energy. Germany has conquered France and has ongoing enmity with Russia, with World War I, known as the Schlieffen War, producing results more like World War II's. And the ongoing squabbles between nations indicate that the more things change, the more they stay the same. This holds true in the main Martian conflicts as well as the peripheral human conflicts. After the Martians' initial hellish attack, they consolidate their dominance within the Martian cordon in Britain, with the human survivors living day to day and even growing accustomed, almost comfortable, to Martian rule, either hiding from the aliens or appeasing them with blood donations or an occasional sacrifice. Not only does the prose style very accurately emulate that of Victorian-era literature, to a sometimes aggravating degree, as I'll explain later, but the world-building also encompasses a Victorian understanding of space. In The Massacre of Mankind, Mars is arid and cold but still has liquid water and those famous canals, Venus is a tropical swamp world, the sun will cool down and shrink as it ages, the planets of the solar system are older the further from the sun they are, and ships are launched into space using mighty cannons. On the one hand, I like this approach. Baxter has created a cohesive world using knowledge from the past. On the other hand, as someone who loves astronomy and cosmology, I find myself a little irritated whenever these clear, real-world errors come up. I'll let the cannons slide, but let me geek out for a moment. Astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli never said Mars had canals, and certainly never attributed them to alien civilizations. He simply observed natural formations on the Martian surface that looked like channels, but the Italian for channels, canelli, was misinterpreted by English speakers as canals, and then people took this misinterpretation and ran with it. Mars is too cold and its atmosphere too thin to support liquid water to any significant extent, although the planet did have a wet, temperate climate shortly after its formation billions of years ago. And the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter recently detected an underground release of water that remained liquid for a short while due to the high salt content, showing that Mars can have liquid water intermittently today, just not rivers or canals. Venus is too hot for liquid water or any kind of hospitability. Its surface temperature averages 462 degrees Celsius, which is greater than the melting point of lead, and the choking carbon dioxide and sulfur-filled atmosphere hosts permanent cloud cover, a runaway greenhouse effect, and crushing pressures equivalent to 3,000 feet in the ocean. The Sun will not cool down and shrink as it ages. Our yellow dwarf star will expand into a red giant, its core compressing and growing hotter while its outer layers balloon outward after the Sun runs out of hydrogen and begins fusing helium. Technically, the outer layers will cool down, hence their red color, but Earth will still very likely be consumed by the expanding Sun. Point being, the Sun will expand and, from our perspective anyway, grow hotter as it dies, until finally discarding its outer layers, forming a confusingly named planetary nebula and leaving behind an inert white dwarf corpse. Planets are not proportionately older the further away from the Sun they are. It is logical to call some surfaces and celestial bodies old or young due to their degree of change over the eons. The eastern hemisphere of Neptune's largest moon, Triton, has recent plains of ice created by ice geysers. The asteroid belt and the Oort cloud are primordial relics of the early solar system. Saturn's moon, Titan, and of course Earth, have new, frequently changing surfaces due to weather, and both Venus and the Galilean moon Io have geologically young surfaces due to constant volcanic activity molding and reshaping them. But, by and large, most bodies in our solar system, from planets and moons to dwarf planets, comets, and asteroids, formed at around the same time, over 4 billion years ago. Of course, Stephen Baxter knows all this. He had a background in mathematics and physics before becoming an author, and he is extremely gifted at crafting plausible, scientifically accurate, or hard science fiction. The Massacre of Mankind would essentially be hard science fiction to a Victorian reader, as it takes artistic license and employs what was considered true at the time. I respect Baxter's artistic decision, but it did kind of bug me a little. The novel carries out some slightly jarring shifts in time, but they feel justified as a way to put you on edge and disorient you, preparing you for the stark, even gruesome reality of the Martian cordon and the audacious plans to fight back against the Martians. The novel maintains a tense, perilous atmosphere punctuated by effective moments of visceral action, grim horror, and even humor. The shifts in perspective are less effective. The novel has extensive tangents with Frank and Verity and Harry and his friends in New York, and the climax jumps all across the world, describing various people's encounters with the Martians in a catastrophic new global attack. I don't think this narrative structure works very well. It works in Stasiland, Sydney journalist Anna Funder's riveting exploration of East Germany's communist past, and the historical novels of New York journalist and Violet from The Incredibles Sarah Vowell, because they use the author's experiences, Funder's trips throughout Germany or Val embarking on a road trip with her sister to research assassinated US presidents, as a framing device to delve into other people's stories. They're not memoirs, but The Massacre of Mankind explicitly presents itself as Julie's memoir. As such, these asides following other characters feel unnecessary and distracting. But the worst part of The Massacre of Mankind is a fairly innocuous recurring phrase. Baxter keeps using variations of "as I would learn later," "as I would come to know," "I would come to learn that," "this would become clear to me later." This type of phrase was apparently a common trope in Victorian literature, but it really pisses me off because it dilutes the suspense of current events by repeatedly alluding to future events. Baxter even abruptly and unfulfillingly reveals the survival of one character and the death of another through these future-looking, tension-disarming phrases. The resolution is also somewhat unsatisfying. While clever and adequately, if a little vaguely, hinted at in the start of the novel, the resolution feels rushed and far more of a self-admitted deus ex machina than microbes killing the Martians in the first novel. I wish The Massacre of Mankind was better. It's an engaging novel with a cool protagonist, some ingenious world-building, and a grimly compelling atmosphere. The scientific inaccuracies, which make the novel more authentic to its source, are just a subjective complaint for me, but the weak character writing, muddled perspective, and certain aggravating, suspense-harming phrases stand as far more serious flaws. Stephen Baxter is one of my favorite authors and has been a major influence on my own style as a writer, but The Massacre of Mankind, while not a dud, is one of his lesser novels and earns 3¼ stars out of 5. Thanks for watching. Cheers.